Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm Emily Smith, co-creator of Touchstone Central Coast. And my other half, Diane Adam, and I are thrilled to have you join us for today's Touchstone topic with Sarah Kerwin. We're going to be utilizing the Q&A today for today's presentation, and we really want to know how you're feeling. So as practice, why don't you hop on the Q&A and bring your panel up, tell us how you're feeling today, say hi. And if you don't mind, there's probably a reason that compelled you to join us today, maybe an expectation or question that you're wanting us to get at. Feel free to pop that in the Q&A. This session will be a bit of a presentation, and then there'll be an opportunity for discussion through the Q&A. So thank you for getting us warmed up and letting us know what your hopes are for today. As Sarah is presenting and questions come to mind, please feel free to ask, and we will circle back to the Q&A panel at the end of her presentation, and we'll start tackling those questions. Sarah was born and raised in Iowa and actually called Los Angeles home for 15 years. She now lives with her husband and 3 dogs, a woman after my own heart, in Santa Maria, California. And we are thrilled to call her friend and neighbor. We became acquainted with Sarah close to, I want to say over 3 years ago, when we were planning our first Leading with Love conference. And honestly, we knew instantly that we had met a beautiful kindred spirit in Sarah. Sarah is the founder and CEO of iLevel Communications, a California-based disability and woman-owned small business dedicated to having the critical conversations necessary to connect communities and drive positive social change for people living with disabilities. She is also the host of Include This podcast, and I can't say it without the finger. It's a movement for disability equity that amplifies disabled voices and works alongside disability allies to unify the disability community. Sarah has more than 25 years of public administration experience, and for the last decade, her work and research has focused on healthcare administration, communications, training, and policy. She's appeared in several advocacy videos for the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and she's been interviewed for feature articles in Prevention Magazine. And honestly, I could probably go on and on, but I won't, because I want you to have more time with her. So Martin Luther King Jr. said, "It's not possible to be in favor of justice for some people and not be in favor of justice for all people." Sarah works hard to give power, voice, and dignity for individuals with disabilities, and we're so happy to welcome you, Sarah.
Wow, that was quite an intro. Thank you guys so much. I remember meeting you, it must have been in 2018, but right before you had your conference. And it has been such a lovely journey getting to know you both and getting to this point of being here with you both today to talk about this shift into discomfort, and this wholehearted shift into discomfort that I've really been going through. And I'm excited to be here with you today, take a deeper dive into what this really means. And how we really shift into those uncomfortable places in our lives with having more control, right? Being comfortable in that discomfort and knowing that we do have some control in that when things feel out of control. I have felt extreme discomfort for the last 10 years, I can honestly say. I have multiple sclerosis. I was diagnosed in January of 2011, and most recently in 2009, diagnosed with a rare inner ear disorder, excuse me. So I have lived in this discomfort, and I have lived in a place where I haven't used my voice and I was thrust into these health issues I wasn't prepared for. And so I really needed to learn how to use my voice. So why am I here today talking about a wholehearted shift into discomfort? Because if I look back on these experiences over the 10 years, I actually can see that I have had some control over that if I would have known how to do that during the time. So it's okay for us to be comfortable when we sit in our discomfort, right? And if we can do this, and if I can do this, I think anyone can do this. So that's why I'm here today to talk about how we shift into different places in our lives and how we can be comfortable in doing so. Um, at first, so I want to use a quote that kind of sums it up for me. At first, everything was out of my control. Everything was uncontrollable. And I rebelled against that because I honestly, I rebelled against that because I felt powerless, right? Those experiences, however, did teach me that I have the power to consciously and wholeheartedly shift into these uncomfortable places, and that I can trust my vulnerability and my intentions. I think intentions is a really big one. I can trust my intentions when I'm in these places. And this has helped me change my approach to being uncomfortable. 10 months ago, I actually had no idea that I'd be here today and that I would have gone through this very significant life-changing shift. However, with the pandemic and then the murder of George Floyd, the rising awareness around the Black Lives Matter movement, my anxiety over the election in our country, and then the pandemic again, were all catalysts, right? So for me, as a woman living with two invisible disabilities, I felt like an activist who couldn't act. I felt like someone who couldn't use my voice to shine a light on what was happening with the disability community within these larger movements. So 10 years ago, when I got sick, I was just in survival mode and really have been for the last 10 years until I had surgery last year, which was life-changing for me. And so being in this place of survival, it's very difficult to want to use your voice, except when you need to use it to advocate for yourself or to advocate for someone else that's maybe experiencing something similar to what you're experiencing. I went into this survival mode, and then I knew this year that it was time for me to make a different choice, that I needed to use my voice and I needed to make a decision to use my voice, and that would be my action. And, it sounds really simple. Sarah, let's use your voice, and that's going to be really simple action. Well, it was not. It was extremely messy and it was crazy. And I decided I would first use my voice all over social media. So I vomited all over social media, which caused a huge stir because I didn't usually vocalize my thoughts or feelings. It was more sharing photos of family and friends. And it wasn't welcomed by everyone. And that is what goes back to the intent, I think, when we know that our intent is good, yet we still get backlash on using our voice and the words that we're using. It's very difficult to have the strength to continue after that. But I was committed. So I was definitely not going to stop using my voice. During this time, I also really started to understand that using my voice meant embracing all sides of myself, and that I really had to embrace my disabilities as part of my identity and share this part of myself so that I could actually feel like the most authentic. And then also just to be able to understand myself and be able to share all sides of myself. And I feel like that's the most important for me. So this caused me or led me to rebranding and rebuilding my small business. And so I launched my first website and I'm launching my podcast called Include This. So I have this kind of feel good voice on one side and this more of let's start including disability in this conversation on the other side. So were these choices all made wholeheartedly? I don't know. I want to break down what we mean by a wholehearted shift into discomfort. Excuse me. So wholehearted. So I always go back, I'm a data and science girl. So I always go back to what does wholehearted mean, right? So if you look at the Merriam-Webster, they say that wholehearted is completely and sincerely devoted. You're determined and enthusiastic. It also says that you have this earnest commitment that's free from all reservation or hesitation. Now, when I first started going into this shift, I definitely think I was free of reservation and hesitation because I didn't realize my intention was good. I didn't realize maybe the backlash that I was going to get. So I went in free from reserve or hesitation, but I became more reserved and hesitated and had to push through those feelings more so as time went on during this learning and growth for me. So then I wanted to look at Wholehearted Living, right, by Brene Brown, which is something that a lot of people are talking about lately. How are we wholeheartedly living? And that really is about engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness, right? It means cultivating the courage and compassion and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I'm enough. It's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but that doesn't change the truth that I'm also brave and worthy of love and belonging. So when I started thinking about this presentation, because Diane and Emily and I have had these conversations over the past few months, so they have really been privy to these experiences that I've had firsthand and the strong emotions that I've had and the excitement, the fear that I've had, and just all the emotions that I've gone through. So if wholehearted is how we're going to approach the change, right? So the wholehearted piece is how we approach the change. And I think that I could have also put in here conscientious, or I mean, I think there are a lot of different words you could use here, but I like this idea that we break it down into three pieces. How do we want to approach it? How do we want to look at that change that we're going through? And then what are we going into? What are we committing to going into? For me, it was being uncomfortable. Um, so I chose the word wholehearted more so towards the end of this shift that I was going through, but I don't always think that I was doing it consciously throughout. I think that we kind of go in between different pieces of wholehearted, like that reserve or hesitation, or no matter what gets done, I'm enough. I can't say that every day I thought that. So I think that there's ebbs and flows in this process as well, but it helps to have kind of a guide, at least for me, it did. Um, so I did actually, the one thing I did use is I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid, but mostly what I said was, oh my gosh, I'm totally imperfect. I don't know if I belong here. I'm extremely uncomfortable and I'm very much afraid, right? So I think that we also changed our definitions and how we view these as we move on as well. So I kept going, right? That's the point. I kept going. I didn't have a name for it. I had no idea what was happening. I hadn't planned it out, but I was moving into this different version of myself, and I was very aware of it after a few months. And this different version of myself, as we get into the shift, I don't think we're changing. I don't think we're just replacing one person or one version of ourselves for the other. We're just integrating different pieces of ourselves, right? That now create that bigger whole. So, however you are going to approach this change may be different than how I would approach it. So, you just kind of have to figure out what is the best way for you and understand that it's not going to be perfect and it might be completely messy and crazy and ugly, and that's okay. So the shift, right? The change. I like this word, and I'm just going to go through this relatively quickly because they say to exchange for, replace by another. And as I just talked about, I think it's more um, taking in all of those pieces of ourselves and integrating all of those pieces of ourselves as opposed to taking one and then changing it into something else. But I want to move on to this discomfort, but then I want to go back to the shifting. So discomfort, I think we're all pretty well versed in what discomfort means and what uncomfortable means, right? So we're uncomfortable, we're uneasy, we're annoyed, all of these things. I was just sharing with Diane and Emily that I was recording a podcast, and that's a very uncomfortable for me as well. I have no idea how to do audio. So I've taught myself how to do the audio side, and everyone said it was so simple. It is not, I promise you. But what I want to tell you, I want to share a little quote in this section. I love this. It's by Ash Alves, and she says, "You are in a state of discomfort because old ways of being no longer serve a purpose in your life." That's when we're in an uncomfortable state. A new version of you is being called to emerge apart to emerge right now. Things are falling apart to rebuild foundations that were rocking in the first place. Trust that this current state, right? That this current state of discomfort is happening for a greater purpose. And I had many a friend and many a colleague tell me, be comfortable in that discomfort. It's okay to be in that discomfort. And I think that that was key for me, how to learn to be comfortable, knowing that I was completely uncomfortable. So this was one of the quotes that probably about 3/4 of the way through this year, this just really rang true for me. As you are shifting, you'll begin to realize that you are not the same person you used to be. The things you used to tolerate have become intolerable. When once you remained quiet, you are now speaking your truth. Where once you battled and argued, you are now choosing to remain silent. You are beginning to understand the value of your voice, and there are some situations that no longer deserve your time, energy, and focus. And in this part of the presentation, I want to talk a little bit with you about why I looked at this quote and what it meant for me when I was thinking about this past year for me. So, I'm not the same person I used to be. I quit using my voice 10 years ago because I just was needed to survive and get through the day and figure out my health issues. Um, but I still have those pieces of myself, right? They're just integrated into me. And the things you used to tolerate have become intolerable. So one of the biggest examples of this for me over the past few months has been harassment, verbal harassment, and actually speaking to people and having a voice about wearing a mask, not being able to be spoken to in certain ways. And so I shared this example with Diane and Emily that there is a dog park that I have gone to since I've lived in this area. And I have recently had very difficult experiences there with some harassment at the dog park. And previously, I would have never said anything about it. I would have gone with the flow, had a good laugh, and then gone home and probably either stewed on it or completely just forgot about it. And as I started going through this shift, I started noticing that people's language and people's words were affecting me more and more to a point where I really needed to start using my voice. Now, for me, this feels like empowerment, right? I'm empowered and I'm using my voice. Well, the people on the receiving end of that don't necessarily know that I'm in this empowered moment and using my voice and all of these things that I want to talk about and share with them and educate them on. And it's not always welcome. And I think that we need to understand that when we do make this decision, this conscious decision to, for me in this case, use my voice, that that's not always going to be met in the exact way that we imagine it will be met. Because we can't control for how people are going to react what we want to say, but we can control what we say. We can make sure that it's true, that it's kind, and that it's necessary. If it's necessary for you to not feel uncomfortable in a situation that you're in, then yes, there's a time and a place to say that. We were at the store the other day, and the whole time an individual had the mask down around the chin. And for me, I just had a call this week with the executive director of COVID Survivors for Change. And I'm listening to these stories from survivors, their families, all these stories, and how they've used their voice to ask people to wear masks, to ask people to be more respectful of COVID and what it does, and maybe not use the verbiage that they use or the words that they use because it minimizes the experience that they're having. And so I found myself in that store wanting to make a comment. But if you also look at this, where you once battled and argued, you're now choosing to remain silent. I made a choice there to remain silent because I didn't feel that, given the situation and where we were at, that it was going to change much in that situation. So I feel like I have a little bit more control over my voice, that I can use it in a productive way. And that's what I'm trying to do with my podcast and my business. one thing with my podcast that has made me extremely uncomfortable is that I am rah. I come from a public administration background. I'm all about policies, procedures, legislation, everything. And I love the words inclusion and equity. And I think that disability really is an afterthought to all of those efforts currently. And so when I went into this, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm totally going to highlight all of these things about the disability community and inclusion and equity. And as I started having more and more conversations, I realized that the disability community, just like any other community, has issues, has silos, has um, so many nuances to it. And so I really got to a point where I started feeling uncomfortable. Am I worthy enough to have this conversation with people? I have two invisible disabilities. I can't claim that my experiences have been as difficult as someone else's experiences. They've been very different also. And so I think that when we have shared experiences, that's where we can come together on certain things, especially within the disability community. But we've gone through so many conversations about, am I disabled enough? Am I disabled enough to have this show? Am I disabled enough to go to Costco at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock in the morning when autoimmune compromised people go? Well, society has told me no, because Costco, I mean, people in line have asked me to show my parking placard, or asked me, what's wrong with you? You don't look like you need to be here. You don't look like you need to park in that disability parking space. And in the past, I would try to use my voice in every single situation because I felt like I need to educate, I need to shift everyone's mentality and their thinking and their perceptions. But I've now learned, and if you look again back at this quote, I'm understanding the value of my voice, that there are just some situations that don't deserve my time, my energy, or my focus anymore. And I need to start looking at maybe the bigger picture, as opposed to looking at each of these individual situations. I still use my voice when I'm in a situation like that, but in a different way. I remember Carl, my husband, was very nervous when we went to Costco, and he did not want to go during the time for autoimmune compromised people because he said he did not want to get into a conflict because I would want to share with everybody why disabilities are not always visible. So it has been really uncomfortable. I've learned that within the disability community, I played wheelchair basketball, I now coach it, that other people within the disability community think that that's just athletes, adaptive athletes trying to be able-bodied and show their physical prowess and all of that. So the things that I've learned just by going into the spaces of discomfort that I've gone into, I couldn't trade this education and the learning and the connections that I've made. I could not trade that for anything. I mean, it's been amazing. So all of this really goes back into the shifting. And I think the action more so, this piece of it, I think, is the most important piece of it, whether it be wholehearted or whether it be into discomfort or whether it be a conscientious shift into gratitude, right? Or a wholehearted shift into something else. I think that for me, this structure helps me just understand the process that I'm going through and give a name to it. If I can figure out where I'm at in this process and if I need to give a name to that. So I'm going to show one more slide here, the human factor. So again, I love data, I love policies, procedures, guidelines, and I train on them all day long. The problem is that we cannot control for the human factor. We can have laws in place, we can have tools, resources, all these things, but we cannot control for the human factor. And that's on an individual basis, right? That human factor is feelings, perceptions. You might come into contact with someone who has a lack of emotional awareness, nonverbal cues. I get a lot of nonverbal cues from people, and I know what they're saying. Lack of understanding, defensiveness. I think that's huge when we try to use our voice, the defensiveness. Lack of compassion. I think that's actually what keeps people from using their voices the most, is that the receiver of what we're sharing is not going to have compassion or empathy or understanding of what we want to share with them. And there is a difference between sympathy and empathy. There's cynicism, there's fear of change, mood swings, and just general lack of knowledge when we're starting to talk to people about uncomfortable topics. And that is really what drove me to relaunch my business and to have this podcast, is to start having those uncomfortable conversations about disability. And so the first podcast episode that I have coming out is called Am I Disabled Enough? And then we go into a conversation about inclusion, and that inclusion is really nothing without action on the back end, and really understanding just the multifaceted human beings that we are, that we can't be put into a box, right? We're all going to have different experiences. We're all going to need to shift in different ways throughout our lives. And so that is really, in a nutshell, I guess I could say that is really the process that I have gone through over the past 10 months. And I really didn't think I could be more uncomfortable, than the past 10 years, but I have been extremely uncomfortable, and I've really taken enjoyment from it, because I have an opportunity to go into conversations and say, listen, I may make a bad word choice, right? I may use the wrong term. I may use the wrong word, but please correct me. And I think that when we open up ourselves to that feedback and to having those conversations, it's better to have those conversations than to not have them at all. And so my hope is that with my podcast and with my business, that I can start empowering other people with disabilities to shift into these uncomfortable areas as well for themselves, perceived and real barriers, and go shift into uncomfortable places and have that personal growth and be comfortable and confident and feel empowered. I was talking with a girlfriend of mine the other day, and she has not had a job in a while, and we really want her to be out in the world. And it was the first time in the 7 years that we've been friends that she told me, you know what, Sarah, I'm not comfortable. I'm in a wheelchair. I have to go into an office. I would rather be around more people in an organization that also are wheelchair users, as opposed to going into an organization where I would be maybe the only wheelchair user. So I think that it's important for us to understand that even after, 7 years of being friends, and this is something that I didn't know, that I didn't understand, and I need to understand that how I can help her may not be the same way that I would help someone else. And that goes back to the human factor. And how do we help someone be okay in being uncomfortable, and still being able to share her gifts with the world?
Oh, golly, Sarah, what a joy and a treat. And so now we will launch into some Q&A. We've asked participants to put questions in, and Emily and I've been looking at that throughout. Sarah, your enthusiasm and your passion and everything that you've described here, Emily and I have absolutely felt, even though we've had to be socially distanced, firsthand. The first time we met you, you described yourself as a puppy and full of life and full of action and activity. And you talked about your feelings of your voice with regard to activism. And so along with that, you talked about the fact that discomfort leads to personal growth. Can you kind of describe a couple of little aha moments that you've had along the way towards your own personal growth?
The aha moment for me was when I decided, so after the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, I lost all my contracts for my business, and my business has been run on word of mouth for the last 3.5 years. So in May, my last contract ended, and I thought, okay, well, I have an opportunity here to really look at the impact that I want to make and figure out what I want to put out in the world, and how I want to use my voice. And the aha moment for me came when I realized that although I'd been really thinking about how do I embrace all of these parts of me and be comfortable with, okay, Sarah isn't just Sarah who lives with disabilities. Sarah is, educated and brings different things to the table and ideas and topics. And I felt like I was really held back by that disability piece of it and how it would look. And there was an aha moment. I had a colleague ask me, why would you sort of out yourself with this disability when you look completely able-bodied. You could be in this kind of I should say non-disabled community. So you could really be there. And I said, I'm not really disabled enough to be part of the disabled community. And I'm not really non-disabled enough to be part of the disabled community, right? Am I saying that right? So non-disabled and disabled. And I said, so I have to embrace all of these sides of me because it's the only way I know how to be authentic, because in either space, I'm either pretending to feel really healthy and well every day, all day, every day, or in this space, I'm pretending to, somehow fit in that my disability is maybe worse than it is, so that people with disabilities also see that I have a disability. And I heard a quote the other day from an activist, and they said, I want to look good, but I also want to look sick so that people understand.
Right.
And I think that that's that fine line. And so that was my aha moment that, okay, I can't live in this middle. I can live in this middle, but I have to embrace both sides.
Yeah.
Both parts.
Yeah.
Sarah, for our audience, could you explain what your disability is?
Yes. So multiple sclerosis, MS, is an autoimmune disease where the God, you'd think I would have this off the top of my head, where the immune system attacks the central nervous system. Basically, the immune system sees the myelin sheath around the central nervous system as a foreign body, and the immune system will attack that. And what happens is that lesions will grow in parts of the brain. And so if, say, a message has to come from the front lobe and it needs to go to my right arm, that lesion interrupts that message, which is why there's a delay and debilitation with the MS. The other one is Superior Semi-Circular Canal Dehiscence. It's very much a mouthful, SSCD. It's very rare. It's majority of women in their mid-30s. And it is an inner ear disorder. The superior semicircular canal should have 2 holes in it where your air and voice and sounds should go in and out. I have a 3rd window, which allows there to not be any sort of barrier between the brain fluid and the inner ear. And that causes a symptom called autophony, which is you can hear your own internal organs. So for the last 10 years, up until I had surgery last October, I have been able to hear a constant heartbeat in my left ear. So I got to a point where I became very isolated. I couldn't talk to people because I would get super excited. And then in my left ear, I would just have this heartbeat beating in my ear. And it was from my internal body. It's not, it's the craziest thing. I could hear my eyeballs moving, and it got to a point where I stopped telling providers because they would say, oh my gosh, she needs mental health, she needs mental health help. And I'm like, listen, I know I need mental health help, but I know this is not that. Okay. So, it was this constant fight for 9 years for someone to really hear me about these. And so for me to be in this position of advocate and activism is a very natural progression for me. And, without these neurosurgeons at UCLA, I wouldn't be where I am. I wouldn't be in this position. They really have changed my life. So
it's a constant reminder that you can't judge from what you see, that everybody has a story and experience, and you have to keep that in account whenever you're working or dealing with people. It's
absolutely
a constant reminder to ourselves. There's a question here. It says, do you have any tips on how to gracefully back out of difficult conversations that you decide you no longer want to be in?
I love that you said gracefully. Diane and Emily and I were just talking that I'm more of like a blunt in your face back out, or, you have to give me a larger sign. So to think about it gracefully, I think that one colleague has shared with me to use specific words, right? I need to get a call right now, or I need to, my phone's ringing, I can step away from this, which might help, may not. I would take just say, you know what, I'm uncomfortable with this conversation, and I appreciate you as a person or whatever our relationship is together, but I don't feel comfortable continuing this conversation right now. And I hope that you understand that, because I want to make sure that our friendship or whatever relationship we have stays intact. And if that's not the case, and maybe that's not a relationship that you want to remain intact, then I would be more forceful. Does
Well,
that help?
yeah, absolutely. Grace and force can sometimes be used together, right? Um, I think that goes back to what you said earlier in your presentation about using your voice. And I personally, from our conversations, I'm proud that you're at this point right now from where we started talking, because and what's led us up to today. And you've given us a lot of gifts along the way, but today you added to it, my voice is true and kind and necessary. And that all goes into the grace as well, which also leads towards your particular authenticity and your choice of deciding and making a decision about whether or not to engage is reminds me of something else that you said to us, and that's kindness is contagious. So being kind even to yourself in that moment. I don't want to get riled up while having this confrontation with this person. Do I need it? Do I want it? Maybe not. I'm going to, move my cart down to the other aisle. And so, amen to that. So we have another question here that asks about how can we support the disability community, the larger disability community in our everyday life? Like Emily said, we can't see a lot of them. Some of the folks on the call today have disabilities of their own that are perhaps invisible. So how do we as individuals marching through our own worlds help and support the disability community every day?
I think that's a really interesting question, because there's so many different, so for instance, service animals versus emotional support animals today, right? There's a big issue around emotional support animals no longer being able to fly on airlines.
Right.
Now, for myself, living with an invisible disability and having had used a dog as a service animal, but didn't look like a real dog service animal, right?
Yeah.
So I would always get questioned about it, or people would have comments. And I would say that, one thing I can say is that if you do see something that's happening, I wouldn't insert yourself in that situation to say, hey, sir, don't say anything, or hey, ma'am, don't say anything to her. But I do think that there's some empathy that can come after a situation like that, where someone could walk up and say, hey, I'm sorry that that person said that to you about your placard, I'm sure, or parking there. I'm sure that you have every right to be here as any of us do, or, something that's supportive in a way. And that goes back to, really, I was working with an intellectual developmental disability company in Colorado, and I didn't know much about that community. Really, my exposure had been at a physical rehabilitation hospital. It had been in adaptive athletics, but not really in this community. And so I found myself one day, I was in Target, and a woman had an older child who was severely debilitated, and the child was adult, was having a fit, kind of just throwing a tantrum in the middle of the aisle. Now, my initial thought was, oh my gosh, I feel really bad. I don't want to make her more uncomfortable while she's trying to have this conversation with her adult child. And maybe I just need to go into another aisle, which I did. But then as I was driving back to the office that day, I was thinking, oh my gosh, what if she felt like I shunned her? That like I couldn't be in that same aisle with her because I just couldn't be around that sound or that person or whatever it may be. And so I had that conversation with my client, and I said, gosh, what do you think about that? Because that was my thought when I drove home. And he said, how you can handle that, Sarah, is to say, just walk by and say, hey, you got this. Looks like it's a rough day, but all of us moms have it. I mean, I don't have children, but all moms have issues, and you're doing a great job. You got this. And so I think that there are little ways that we can do to think it through a little bit more when we see something, as opposed to having an instant reaction or perception of what we're seeing, to think, okay, I have no idea what's going on in this situation, but why can't I be the positive and the kind person in this, as opposed to being, some just piling on more heartache or sadness. And I felt really bad that I thought that I was making this conscious decision to give her space and time to be with her child and figure that out. But in reality, I did speak with other parents about this. In reality, I was making them feel very sad and very shunned and not included in the community. And that was not my intent. And that goes back to our intention, right? From the original part of the conversation. We have to know where our intentions are. And if we know that our intentions are good, then we can figure out how to then act and behave in a better way because our intentions are good. And maybe we just don't know exactly how to act, and we need to ask somebody. And that goes back into having conversations that are uncomfortable, because I don't want to go in and say to someone, this is a client, right? This is a client that owns and runs an intellectual developmental disability service agency. And I'm going in and saying that I don't know how to react around someone, a mother with a child in that situation.
Yeah.
So that was a tough conversation for me, because that I have to, as a consultant, I have to be the one who knows the information and have the knowledge and all of this. But there is a point where we need to be vulnerable. And in order to learn what we need to learn, we need to have these conversations and not be scared to have them.
I appreciate your comment about not inserting yourself, because I think, we can have multiple reactions to situations that we're observing and seeing. And I think we instantly, have a reactionary response to what we're doing, and we want to make things okay. But sometimes that insertion, I'm guessing, could actually make it worse and perpetuate it, make it longer than it needs to. But just remaining present so that you can step in afterwards and provide comfort. And I'm thinking it's probably not even always necessary to have the right words, but just to say, I don't know what to say, but I just want you to know that I saw that, and I'm sorry, and I care about you. I mean, we don't always know what to say, but just that vulnerability is helpful to somebody else.
And I think that really, that really goes back into where my discomfort was, is that as I'm learning about Black Lives Matter movement, as I'm learning about the history and the intersectionality between Jim Crow era Black disability laws and where those intertwine, and all this education that I've had, I think that we learn more, and if we allow ourselves to be uncomfortable. I have been corrected. I had a young woman who will be on my podcast, and we were trying to think about titles for it. And I said, I can't remember what I said, but it was something, a Black mother's something. And she said, listen, Sarah, she said, I'm more than a Black mother. And I was like, oh my God, aha, yeah, because I'm more than a disabled woman. So when we have those conversations and we can be ourselves, and she felt comfortable saying, hey, Sarah, that's like not kosher, right? That's not okay. So then I can learn that for next time. But if we don't have those, then all of us are keeping all of these things inside, and we don't know how to share our thoughts or our ideas because we're fearful that we won't use the right words. And then the conversations don't happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
You talked when we were on one of our many wonderful visits about people shouldn't let their passion, which you've talked so eloquently about today, be a burden. Have you been able to wrestle that down to the ground, and is your passion no longer your burden? Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, Diane and Emily are referring to a very specific day, and I walked away from everything. I actually put down all my work. I was no longer inspired. I was angry at the audio process for a podcast. And I was very overwhelmed. My passion felt very overwhelming, to a point that it felt like a burden. I was overwhelmed. I was exhausted. My symptoms were flaring from my MS. My poor husband was like, are you up today or are you down today? I mean, I'm not sure what's going on. So I was super overwhelmed. And one day, I don't even know how I got to this point, but I just said, you know what, I'm done with it. And I put it down and I said, I'm walking away from this. And I had no idea. I didn't set a time frame. I didn't set a limit. I just said, I'm done with this until I'm interested in it again. And I walked away for 2 weeks. I ended up moving back, the launch of my podcast and all of that, because I said, I'm not interested in it anymore. I'm not passionate about it right now. And so after those 2 weeks, I just one day woke up and I had all different ideas for the podcast and I had all this different work that I wanted to do, but it was necessary for me to walk away at that point. Yeah. So it does become a burden, I think.
Sometimes we just have to regenerate. You can burn yourself out trying to do good things, and we forget to take care of ourselves. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Right. I think laying it down for 2 minutes, 2 hours, 2 days, in your case, 2 weeks, good advice for anybody, right?
And I remember Diane asked me that day, you asked me that day, you said, why 2 weeks?
Yeah.
And I said, I have no idea. I have no idea. I just said, I'll go back to it when I'm interested in it again.
And again, that's great advice for anybody feeling that overwhelm, which we're all feeling it. I mean, especially now, and especially in California, right? And
yeah, I was
we're on
talking
the verge of being majorly shut down again, and I think everybody's feeling just the weight of it all. And that, so anyway, that's super good advice. You've talked a couple times about your podcast, but I mean, let's hear it. Tell us everything. How can we get it? When is it going to air? What's the start date? Give us all the details that you can.
So the podcast is Include This, which is a play on inclusion, right? Like include this. Oh yeah, you guys always do the point. Carl, my husband, says that when that finger comes out, he knows it's serious.
Right.
So the podcast is really trying to elevate the conversation around disability. So as opposed to here's what disability is and this and that, it's getting into really the nitty gritty of what people go through, right? Am I disabled enough is the first episode, which I kind of talked on, but am I disabled enough to have this podcast? And that's a conversation that I have with a colleague of mine. Then we go into a conversation that's inclusion is bull beep. Well, it's called asterisk.
Oh yeah.
So I've just say beep. Yeah. So I just had this conversation this morning, and even just having that conversation months ago with the guest that I talked to today was uncomfortable, because here I am, public admin, like rah, policies for inclusion and equity, all of this, yay. And he gets on the Zoom call with me and he was like, Sarah, I just have to tell you, and inclusion is bullshit. And I was like, oh my God, what? I mean, at first my jaw just dropped and I sat there, but then my mind was racing. I thought, oh my God, I have to change my messaging. I have to change my mission statement. What is he talking about? So we get into, without the action on the back end of inclusion, then the words mean nothing. It's really just woke capitalism making money off of some terms, buzzwords and terms, without doing anything with accountability on the back end. We go, and then we kind of go through messaging, and we talk about COVID and the messaging around COVID, and really that was really ableist towards people with disabilities. Then we go into COVID-19 and COVID-19 for long haulers. What does that look like? Is that a disability? Will that be covered under the ADA? Will that be included in any of the legislative laws that we have? What will happen there? So it's looking at kind of the larger issues. How inclusive is your city? Another one's called We're Not Here for Inspiration. Inspiration porn, we call it. As apparently there's a new term for it, but a lot of my friends are like, just because I'm rolling down the airport in my chair doesn't mean that I'm trying to motivate or inspire you. So please don't walk up to me and be like, oh my God, you're so motivating. Yeah. Why? Because I came to the airport? Those are the conversations. Those are the things that, but on the flip side of that, what I always tell my friends is that that's someone trying to be kind.
Sure.
The intent, that's when we go back to the intent, right? So that person is trying to be kind and interactive and have a conversation. So maybe that's when we take the opportunity to say, hey, I love that you engaged with me, but just for next time, maybe you don't say that because it really is offensive.
Sure. So how can people tune in, or would you like them to go to your website to find out more details?
Yes, go to the website
Okay.
and it will have podcast at the top, and then you'll be able to see the schedule and all of the guests. I have a couple of outstanding, but it's just been, I've really done a lot of targeted outreach. So
Yeah.
these topics are very specific.
Yeah.
And they really align into each other
Uh-huh.
all the way towards the end of it. So I'm really excited. Again, the audio has been, everybody's like, the audio is so easy. That's been my least favorite part.
Well, look, here we are. There's foibles every time we get on, and we get through it, and we have a good time doing it. So
True.
second to the include this, for the people on the conversation today that have a business perhaps and need a disability consultant, is that the way to get a hold of you too, would be your website?
Yes, and
Okay.
you can see services at the top, and excuse me, you can go to those services and it'll
Yeah.
outline all the services.
Oh, that's perfect. And of course, we encourage people to like and at and feel and pass and share on your social media, which Facebook and Insta, there ilevel.works, which is great. And then your LinkedIn, Sarah E. What's the E for?
Elizabeth.
Lovely. Sarah Elizabeth Kerwin. So we're here at 12:52, believe it or not, Sarah Elizabeth Kerwin. You've been such a delightful guest, and I know that the audience has had a great time listening to you. And as always, Emily and I could stay here and visit with you for another hour and a half. Each of our conversations went on and on and on, and they were all so wonderful. So we like to end our touchstone topics with one last question. If you don't mind pondering this for just a moment, what does leading with love mean to you, Sarah?
I have been thinking about this.
Oh, good.
Leading with love is the opposite of leading, or is the same to me, opposite of leading with no, right? So I think that in a lot of times when we're talking to someone and we're asking for something, our automatic response is to lead with, I'm not sure, no, I don't think that would be good. So for me, leading with love is saying, I don't know, what would that look like? Let's talk about that. Let's look at what maybe that reasonable accommodation, maybe it is reasonable. You just made imagine it that it's unreasonable. So it's really leading with love to me is leading with having an open conversation, whether there's going to be pushback on you, some feedback in ways that you can improve. And I think leading with love is challenging ourselves to be better for ourselves and for others.
That is super perfect.
Nice.
Very perfect.
It kind of ties into some key things that I'm going to take away from today, and that was integrating different pieces of ourselves, that it's not just one big thing. It's a lot of little things. And I think that's nice because it removes the overwhelming feeling that, oh my God, I got so much work to do. And then also considering things that no longer deserve your time, energy. You know, I loved when you were talking about the vomiting all over social media. Like, there's some things that don't deserve our time and energy, right? So we just have to agree to disagree. And that's a level of respect. And then your communication, true, kind, and necessary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me.
Your authentic self today, Sarah. You're welcome for us having you. It's been a delight, and we thank everybody for being here, and we really praise and applaud you, Sarah. Includes this Kerwin.